People who wish they could turn back time. Me. Share. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am taking you through some historical fiction books by Irish authors that you absolutely need to go and check out. Ireland has a hugely rich history. It's a super old country. You might not think that because the Republic itself was only formed around the 1940s. But Ireland as a concept has been around for thousands and thousands of years. We have a rich mythology involving Celtic druids and gods and kings. Also, a large part of our history was tied up in our colonization from the United Kingdom. And following on from that, we also have the social changes that came into Ireland following independence. So, with such a huge history at play, there is absolutely no reason that there isn't a specific time period that isn't going to appeal to you. Starting with a children's book that was set in the famine between 1845 and 1849, that is Under the Hawthorn Tree by Marita Conn McKenna. This is actually a series of 3 books, all following 3 young siblings, Eilidh, Michael and Peggy. At the start of this series, Eilidh is 10, Michael is 7 and Peggy is 5 years old. Their parents have both perished in the famine, as well as their younger infant sister Bridget, and they know that there is absolutely no hope for them if they want to avoid the workhouse than to go to a distant town named Castletaggart in search of 2 old women who are the aunts of their mother. In the first book, you are following the 3 children as they're on their pilgrimage from their hometown to Castletaggart, and you are going through with them all of the hardship that being on the road at this time brings into them. There is so much death and disease and hunger and sickness that is basically dotted around the country. There is so much that they have to do even to just survive. I first encountered this book when my teacher in 4th class, so when I was about 10 years old, read it out to us in just an evening reading situation, and I can still vividly remember her reading the passage where their younger sister Bridget passes away. I feel like it's such a great book to give to children who are just learning about the famine in Ireland for the first time. It will kind of humanize it and it will kind of put it into perspective for them that it wasn't just older people from 150 years ago. These were also young children who were also affected by it. Then, in the second book, Wildflower Girl, you are following Peggy, who is the youngest sibling. I think as this book starts, she is 13 years old, and she has it in her to go off to America in search of a better life. During the famine, over 1 million people died in Ireland, but a further 1 million people emigrated from Ireland to the US or to the UK. And this is a kind of a story of what would have happened to people on that trip. People left Ireland in the so-called coffin ships because if you got on these ships, it wasn't always guaranteed that you were going to walk off it. On a daily basis, quite a lot of people would have died on these ships if it wasn't from the hunger, if it wasn't from the sickness. It would have been from poor sanitation, it would have been from overcrowding, and that is depicted in the early stages of this book. But you also get to see Peggy establishing a new life for herself when she does get to America. Spoiler alert. You also get to see what happens to a lot of people who would have made it to America and how they would have rebuilt their lives and made a fortune for themselves, which is something that would never have seemed possible back in Ireland. Then, in Fields of Home, which is the final book of the trilogy, it follows Eilidh and Michael, who are the 2 siblings left behind in Ireland. Eilidh is now a much more grown-up woman. She's in her early 20s and she has gotten married to a farmhand in a local, high-established house in the area that they live in now. And you also see Eilidh and Michael getting to terms with life after the famine, what the changes were like in Ireland for them, and also how they are just rebuilding their lives from it. The famine of 1845 to 1849 had a huge impact on Ireland. It, as I said, reduced the population by about 2 million to 2.5 million people, and Ireland is still the only country to this day where the population now is actually lower than it was at the start of the 1800s. And it also kickstarted the Irish diaspora, which is one of the most widespread in the entire world. So there is a heavy chance that in the country that you are in now, there is a huge Irish community that you might not even know about. A little bit more recent than the famine is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. This is set in about 1918 to 1920, and it takes place in a maternity hospital in Dublin. However, this is slightly a pandemic book. This is set, as I said, in 1918, and that was the beginning of the Spanish influenza pandemic. This did also affect Ireland, but this book is specifically set in a maternity hospital where you would be expecting that people are full of the joys of bringing new life into the world, But not only are these expectant mothers expected to deliver their children, they are also often doing so under the influence of the Spanish flu. This book follows Julia, who is one of the nurses working in the hospital, and you genuinely do get to see every single outcome that you can imagine from this book. You get to see young mothers who have given birth to a healthy child and get to bring the child home with them. You see a mother who has given birth, unfortunately, to a stillborn child and the grief and the sorrow that will come from that. You also get to see women who have died in childbirth. You also see the impact that this has had on the nurses and on the staff of the hospital. It is an incredibly difficult read at times. It is an incredibly poignant read, but you also really get to see the kind of camaraderie and we are all in this together, we are going to get each other through this, that a lot of the people would have had in their mindset at the time. Emma Donoghue is a phenomenal historical fiction writer, and she has a couple of other historical fiction books under her belt, and I absolutely think you should go and check her out. One of the other books that you should go and check out from Emma Donoghue is The Wonder, which was also turned into a Netflix adaptation starring Florence Pugh. This is about Libby, who is brought to Ireland as a nurse to try and figure out what is happening with a young child. 11-year-old Anna is living outside Athlone, which is pretty much bang in the centre of Ireland, and she hasn't had a bite to eat in about 3 months. But Anna is still completely fine. She is not going through any kind of a health trauma. She is not losing weight. In fact, she is still growing as you would expect an 11-year-old child to. Libby is brought in to understand how it is that the child is sustaining herself, how it is that she is still alive to this day. And Libby is told by the town people that this is because God is performing miracles and he wants this child to stay alive for a specific reason. The book is set just after the famine. I think it is set around the 1860s or the 1870s. So there is still a little bit of kind of food scarcity situations that are going on, and people have changed their mentality about food and about eating. And you can definitely see the impact of this. But I think that the most interesting part of it is genuinely just trying to find out what's going on with Anna. Another historical fiction book by Emma Donoghue and set way back in the 7th century AD is Haven. This follows two monks, an old man named Cormac and a young man named Trian, and they decide to set out and find a small, isolated community in which they can set up an area to worship God. So they take off in boats down the Shannon, which is the longest river in Ireland, and they head out into the wilderness and they head out into the Atlantic, and they come across a tiny island off the coast of Kerry, which is rugged, which is isolated, which is mainly inhabited by birds. And here they set up a monastery, and to this day the island is still known as Skellig Vickle. Skellig Vickle has actually got an ancient monastery ruin on the island, and you might recognise it because it was used as one of the locations for filming for one of the new Star Wars movies. So I'm really interested to see how this book is going to portray that whole idea of bringing Christianity to Ireland and that whole idea of finding a place for people to worship, even if it was way isolated from the rest of the country. Another historical fiction writer from Ireland who you absolutely need to check out is Joseph O'Connor. And if that surname does sound familiar, you would be correct. Joseph is actually the brother of the singer-songwriter Sinead O'Connor, and I'm really interested to see how this talent is going to run throughout the entire family. One of the first books that I would recommend is Star of the Sea, which, like Under the Hawthorn Tree, is set during the time of the famine. This book starts in the winter of 1847, and 1847 was actually the worst year of the famine. This book is set on one of the coffin ships, which is taking people from Ireland to America, and it tells the story of several of the passengers. All of these stories will intertwine and interweave in some way, but it will tell the story of the bleakness that they are leaving behind in Ireland and the conditions that they are going through while they are on this ship to America. And also, I have a feeling that because it is set on a coffin ship, not everyone that we're going to meet is going to be meeting us at the end of this book. I love stories where characters will all have something to do with one another, but they all live completely different lives. So I'm very interested to see how this storytelling is going to go. Joseph O'Connor's latest book, which just came out in January of 2024, is called My Father's House, and it is set in Rome in 1943. At the start of this book, Germany has just taken control of Rome. The Axis forces have just entered Italy. This book mainly takes place in the Vatican City, and it is actually based on the true story of the Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. He was an Irish Catholic priest who helped several Jewish families or Italian families or Catholic families to basically find refuge from these German forces who have come in, and to help them to rebuild their lives while hunger and war and devastation is happening all around them. I am really interested in reading about World War II, not just because now I currently live in Germany and obviously they had quite a big part to play in World War II, but I feel like it's such a big part of Europe's history as a whole. And Ireland didn't really have any part in it. We were neutral for the entirety of World War II. So I'm very interested to read about stories of other people who lived through it or people who were just living through it as ordinary people. I am really interested to see how this book is going to go. Another historical fiction book from Ireland to check out is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This has recently been turned into a film with Cillian Murphy at the head of it, and it follows a man named Bill Furlong who is in his 30s and lives in Wexford. And this is set in 1985 when Ireland was going through a massive economical recession. Our Taoiseach at the time, which is our Prime Minister, had said that Ireland was living way beyond its means, and you can absolutely see that happening in this book. People, for example, had to pare down their Christmas presents where they might have been quite extravagant the year before. Things were not looking as good now. Immigration was starting to rack up and people were leaving Ireland in their thousands on a monthly basis. However, Bill and his wife and their 5 daughters are still left behind in Ireland, and Bill works as a coal driver, so he brings coal from the local quarry and delivers it to homes across the town. One day he is delivering a batch of coal to the local convent and he discovers what it actually is. It's not just a convent, this is one of the mother and baby homes that Ireland was known for and were absolutely rife across the country and still existed until 1996. This is where young women who had fallen pregnant outside of marriage for any reason, be that consensual or not, were sent to kind of repent for their sins, but also to take away the shame that was seen by their family. Bill starts to slowly piece together what is happening in this convent, and when he meets with one of the girls who is in there and she innocently asks him to help her reunite her with her child, things really start to take a turn. I read this back in November and I was absolutely blown away by it. It might be a very short book. I think it's only about 150 to 200 pages, but it packs in such a punch in that time. It is the true embodiment of you don't need to have a 500-page tome to tell a fantastic story. Quite a big part of Irish history is everything that happened in the early 20th century, and particularly the Easter Rising of 1916, where 7 people entered the General Post Office on O'Connell Street in Dublin and basically proclaimed Ireland to be a free republic. There are, as you would expect, quite a few books that are set around this time, and one of them is Rebel Sisters by Marita Conn McKenna. This book actually follows the lay people and the ordinary people of Ireland who would have just been living their lives as everything was happening around them. And it follows 3 sisters, Grace, Muriel and Nellie. And it also deals a little bit with the lead up to the First World War in 1914, where Ireland, which was still under British rule, had been taking part and had been sending soldiers to fight for the British side. I absolutely love books that are set in 1916, and I absolutely love books and any kind of media that is set around Ireland's strive for independence, so I am so excited to get this one read. Another book that is set around 1916 is 1916 by Morgan Llewellyn, and this is actually the beginning of a series. This book follows Ned Halloran, who emigrated to America with his parents in 1912 on board a ship called the Titanic. Ned's parents both lost their lives in the sinking, but Ned came through. He comes back to Dublin and basically sets his life back up here and enrolls in a boarding school called St. Enda's. The headmaster of St. Enda's was Padraig Pearse, who was a pivotal person in the 1916 Rising. And Ned is swept up in the entire precursor to the Rising and everything that happens afterwards. And I am genuinely so excited to get this series read. I know that it spans an entire section of Irish history, and I'm so excited to see what happens here. Of course, you cannot talk about Irish history without mentioning the Troubles, which was a period of sectarian violence and sectarian killings in the 1970s in Belfast. And it actually lasted all the way up until 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement. The first book that I'm going to recommend that is set in the Troubles is Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. This book follows Cushla, who is living in a small town just outside Belfast, and she's living with her mother. During the day, she is a teacher at the local parochial school, and at night, she is a bartender in the local pub. While she is there one night, she meets Michael, who is a Protestant barrister who has been fighting against the IRA. Michael is married. He's significantly older than Cushla, but she is enamored by him. And against their better judgment, an affair starts between the two of them. However, there is an incident involving one of the students at Cushla's school, and this kickstarts an entire change in scenery for everybody's lives. And another book that is set in the Troubles is Milkman by Anna Burns. This is set in an unnamed city, which is widely understood to be Belfast, and it follows a young girl, also unnamed in the book, who has just discovered dating and is starting to date her first boyfriend. But when her brother-in-law discovers their relationship, things start to happen, and our young protagonist starts to gain a notoriety that she never wanted to have. I absolutely loved this book, and I was completely drawn in by just how true to life it was with the situation that was happening in the North in the 1970s. And if that is a time period that interests you in any way, I would definitely recommend that you pick this one up. Those are some of the historical fiction books that are set in Ireland or written by Irish authors that I think you should definitely go and check out this year. What is your favourite historical fiction book, or have I inspired you to pick up any one of these? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the feather quill emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.